Well, Craig, you're working on a piece for the weekend about how every recent president has received less support from the opposition party, opposition voters, than the previous president, and that seems to be holding true with Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, Obama was the most polarizing president ever by one definition because the partisan gap in attitudes toward him was so huge because he had so little support among Republicans. But if you go back over time, Bush had even less support among Democrats, had more support among Democrats than Obama had among Republicans. And every succeeding president has basically become more unpopular with the other party's voters. This is sort of one of the hallmarks of polarization. And there are a lot of reasons to think this pattern is going to continue with Donald Trump. He's got very low ratings among Democrats. He did throughout the campaign. He started his term in the White House with a lot of controversy. We're seeing this huge pushback, protests.
Right.
And this has a lot of implications, I think, for his presidency and for both parties.
Right. The amount of dissent we've seen so far in just 2 weeks is extraordinary. But how does that play with the Democrats that have to work with Trump?
Well, this is the dilemma for Democrats. I mean, there may be some issues where they can imagine working with him on things like transportation and infrastructure, on some spending items, maybe on trade, because some of them share his skepticism of trade deals. But their own supporters, I mean, their base is so anti-Trump over a whole variety of issues that it's going to make it hard for even those Democrats who want to work with him to do so. It's going to make it difficult potentially for Trump when he's trying to do things that are not kind of in the Republican wheelhouse, where he maybe has more common ground with Democrats and loses some Republican support in Congress. It's going to be hard for him to get that Democratic support. But Democrats also have to worry about, the reaction to the reaction and whether the protests and whether their pushback in Congress, how that's playing with the rest of the country.
Well, and what have you heard about that? The Republicans, there is a pushback from the Republicans now to the pushback from the Democrats. And what has Paul Ryan, for example, said about that?
Well, he's been talking about that just in the last couple of days, calling some of the reaction hysterical. I mean, on the one hand, he said, I know how Democrats feel because when we lost in 2008 and lost everything, it was really hard for conservatives to sit and watch Democrats implement an agenda. But Republicans are trying to portray the Democratic reaction as an overreach, as kind of crying wolf, as hysterical. They're trying to, that's a way of trying to erode the credibility of the pushback. And, it's going to be really interesting to watch in the polling and also just sort of the whole sort of political dynamic of this as to whether, as to how sort of voters in between react. They're going to be whipsawed between all the really kind of lightning rod stuff Trump is doing and the very intense reaction to Trump by his opponents. It's going to remind some people in Wisconsin of what they went through during the Walker years, I think.
Right, with Act 10. Now, this will begin to play out with the nomination of Judge Gorsuch, correct? Yeah,
I mean, Judge Gorsuch is obviously a highly qualified judge. He's even gotten some support from past Obama officials. He's a very conservative judge, too, so that's one problem Democrats have. And Democrats also are there's a lot of lingering bitterness over the fact that Republicans refused to take up an Obama nomination to fill this seat for a year because of the pending election. That was kind of a new precedent the Republicans were setting. And there's a certain desire to for payback on the Democratic side. They don't want to make this easy for Republicans because they feel like this seat was rightfully an Obama pick.
Right.